Pretend you're my daddy. A 6-year-old girl. Tears streaming down her face. Grabbing the vest of the most terrifying man in the room with both tiny fists and begging him to be her father. What happened next stopped everyone in that diner cold. Most people see a Hell's Angel and they cross the street. They pull their kids closer. They look away. They see the ink crawling up the neck, the skull patches on the leather, the size of the man, and every instinct they have screams one word: danger. But on a wet Tuesday afternoon inside a roadside diner outside of Shreveport, Louisiana, a crying 6-year-old girl named Elva Ritchie didn't see any of that. She saw the only person in the room big enough to stop what was coming through that door. So she ran straight to him. His name was Richard Collazo, 43 years old, 6'2" of road-worn leather and hard silences. A man whose reputation cleared bar stools without him saying a word. A man people whispered about, never approached, never questioned. A man who hadn't been called daddy in over 8 years. Elva grabbed his vest with both hands, looked straight up at him with the kind of eyes that only terrified children have, wide open and completely honest, and said 4 words that cracked something open inside his chest that he had spent years learning to keep sealed shut. Asterisk, pretend you're my daddy. Asterisk. Richard Collazo froze. Outside, a car door slammed. What followed in the next 11 minutes will be captured on 3 different phones, witnessed by a diner full of strangers, and reported by 2 local news stations by that same evening. It would put one man behind bars, keep a little girl safe, and force Richard to confront the one wound he had never let himself heal. The daughter he walked away from. The family he told himself was better off without him. The version of himself he buried under patches and road miles and the roar of an engine loud enough to drown out everything he didn't want to feel. He thought he was just stopping for coffee. He had no idea that a 6-year-old girl he had never met was about to give him back something he didn't even know he was still looking for. This is the true story of Richard Collazo, the Hell's Angel who became the father a little girl needed on the worst day of her life, and what it cost him to finally become the father his own child deserved. Before we go any further, drop in the comments where you're watching from right now. Stories like this one reach people all over the world, and I love knowing where you are. Now, let's go back to that diner. Richard Collazo didn't do Tuesdays well. Didn't do most days well, if he was being honest, but Tuesdays had a particular weight to them. That was the day he used to drop Maya off at school. Small pink backpack, 2 uneven pigtails he never got quite right, the way she'd turn back at the gate and wave at him like he was the most important person on earth. Maya was 11 now. He hadn't seen her since she was 3. He'd pulled his Harley into the gravel lot of Patty's roadside diner at noon, same as he did most weeks when the chapter rode through this stretch of highway. The others had kept going. Richard had stopped. He always stopped here. Nobody asked why anymore. Inside, he took the corner booth. Back to the wall. Old habit, the kind you don't unlearn. He ordered black coffee and whatever the lunch special was without looking at the menu. Linda, the afternoon waitress, brought it without a word. She'd learned not to make conversation. To everyone else in that diner, Richard Collazo was something to be carefully ignored. Parents instinctively repositioned themselves between him and their children. A man near the window actually picked up his plate and moved to a different table after Richard sat down. Nobody was rude about it. Nobody needed to be. The leather did the talking. What they didn't see, what nobody ever saw, was the photograph tucked inside the front pocket of that vest, worn soft at the edges from handling. A little girl in a yellow dress, squinting into the sun, laughing at something off camera. 3 years old. The last birthday he was there for. He'd tried, after the split. Court dates, lawyers, supervised visits that felt more like interrogations than fatherhood. His ex-wife, Sandra, had made her position clear the day the judge ruled against him. Asterisk, you chose this life, Richard. You don't get to choose her too. Asterisk, he hadn't fought it the way he should have. That was the truth he lived with. Not that the system failed him. He'd failed first. Shown up to the wrong places. Made the wrong calls. Worn the wrong thing to the wrong hearing and watched a judge's face close like a door. He told himself Maya was better off. He told himself that so many times it almost felt true. He still mailed a card every birthday. Pink envelope, $20, a note he spent 3 days writing and finished in 10 minutes. They came back unopened the first 2 years. After that, they just disappeared into silence. And silence, he decided, was its own kind of answer. He was staring into his coffee when the little girl walked in. Pink raincoat, red eyes, holding her mother's hand like it was the only safe thing left in the world. Richard noticed them the way he noticed everything, quietly, completely, and from a distance. He looked away. He didn't know yet that she'd already seen him. Her name was Elva Ritchie, 6 years old, and she had learned things no 6-year-old should ever have to know. She knew what it meant when a car slowed down on their street late at night. She knew the difference between her mother's normal voice and her careful voice, the one she used when she was trying not to make anything worse. She knew how to make herself small in a room, how to read a door, how to measure the distance between herself and the nearest exit without looking like that's what she was doing. She had learned all of it the way children learn things in dangerous homes, not from being taught, but from surviving. Today, her mother Carol had promised her pancakes, a treat, a normal Tuesday. They'd driven 20 minutes to make sure they were far enough from the apartment, far enough that he wouldn't find them. They almost made it. Elva saw the truck first. She recognized it before her brain caught up with what recognizing it meant. The cracked left headlight, the dent along the passenger door, the way it sat too high on its tires like everything about it was trying to look bigger than it was. It turned into the lot slowly, deliberately, the way he did everything. Her mother's hand tightened around hers. One sharp intake of breath. That was all. Carol Ritchie had also learned not to make anything worse. Elva's eyes swept the diner. Fussed. Practiced. 2 teenage boys sharing earphones. Useless. An older woman eating alone. Too fragile. The waitress behind the counter. She'd already seen her mother's careful voice work on women like her. Watched their eyes go uncertain and apologetic. The man by the window had already moved once just because of the weather. Then she saw him. Corner booth. Back to the wall. Big enough to block out the light from the window behind him. Leather vest covered in things she didn't understand but somehow recognized as a language. One that said, "I've been in worse situations than this, and I'm still here." His hands were wrapped around a coffee mug like it was the only thing tethering him to the room. He looked sad, she thought. Strong but sad. Elva Ritchie made her decision in under 3 seconds. She let go of her mother's hand. She crossed the diner in 12 steps, climbed up onto the bench seat across from him, reached out and grabbed the front of his vest with both fists, the way you grab something when you're falling, and looked straight up into a face that had made grown men step back, and said the only thing she could think of, "Pretend you're my daddy." Richard Calazzo looked down at her. The door chimed behind them, and something that had been locked inside his chest for 8 years cracked straight open. Richard didn't think. He responded. That was the thing about men who had lived close to danger for long enough. The body makes decisions the mind is still catching up to. His arm moved around Elva's small shoulders before he'd consciously chosen to do it. His face settled into something calm and unreadable. His voice, when it came out, was steady as concrete. "Hey, baby girl. Sorry I'm late." Elva buried her face into his vest without a word. Her entire body was shaking. Carol froze at the edge of the booth, eyes darting between Richard and the door. He gave her one slow nod. Asterisk, sit down. "I got this." Asterisk, she slid in beside her daughter, her hands flat on the table, pressing down like she needed to feel something solid. The door swung open. His name was Darmack, 38 years old. The kind of man who kept his voice reasonable in public and saved everything else for behind closed doors. He was average height, average build, the type that never looked like a threat until you'd already been in the room with him long enough to understand that the threat was always there, just underneath the surface, waiting for an audience small enough that it felt safe to show itself. He spotted Carol first, then Elva, then Richard. His face did something complicated. He crossed the diner in 6 strides and stopped at the edge of the booth. When he spoke, his voice was measured, performative, the voice of a man who had practiced being reasonable. Carol, we need to go. Carol didn't move. There's a restraining order, Darren. I just want to talk. There is a restraining order. His eyes cut to Richard for the first time. Full eye contact, the kind meant to measure. Who is this? Richard looked up slowly. He didn't adjust his posture, didn't shift his weight, just looked at the man the way you look at something you've already decided about. Her husband, Richard said. The word landed like a hand on a chest. Darren's jaw tightened. She doesn't have a... Her husband, Richard said again, quieter this time, which made it worse. The diner had gone completely still. The teenage boys had pulled their earphones out. The woman eating alone had set down her fork. Linda, the waitress, stood behind the counter with a coffee pot in her hand, not moving. Darren leaned forward, dropping his voice to something private and ugly. You have no idea what you're stepping into. Richard's hand found his phone under the table. Thumb already moving. Brother. Patty's Diner on Route 9. Now. He set the phone face down on the seat without looking at it. Then he looked back up at Darren Mack and said nothing at all. Because some answers don't need words. They need witnesses. And they were already on their way. The sound came before the men did. A low rumble that started at the edge of hearing. The kind that you feel in your sternum before your ears register it as sound. It built steadily, rolling across the parking lot like distant thunder that wasn't distant anymore. Every head in the diner turned toward the windows. 7 motorcycles, pulling in together, unhurried, the way men move when they have nothing to prove and everything to back up. Darren heard it too. Something shifted in his face. Not fear exactly. Men like Darren didn't process fear the way normal people did. It was more like recalculation. The rapid, ugly arithmetic of a man who had built his entire sense of power on choosing targets who couldn't fight back, suddenly realizing the math had changed completely. The door opened. They didn't announce themselves. Didn't need to. 6 men in leather filled the entrance and fanned out across the diner with the quiet, unhurried coordination of people who had done difficult things together before. Big Mike went left. Santos took the counter. The others positioned themselves without a word exchanged, without a signal given, just the seamless movement of a unit that trusted each other completely. Nobody touched Darren. Nobody threatened him. Nobody said a single word to him. They didn't have to. Darren's carefully maintained composure was dissolving in real time. His eyes moved from face to face, finding nothing that looked like an opening. His hands, which had been so steady a moment ago, were doing something restless at his sides. This is, he started. Over, Richard said quietly. This is over. I have rights. She can't just. Officer Hernandez. Richard said it like a statement, not a question, his eyes still on Darren. Already called. As if on cue, blue and red light pulsed through the diner windows. 2 patrol cars. One pulled alongside Darren's truck, blocking it in with a geometry that looked almost casual but wasn't. Officer Dale Hernandez came through the door first, eyes finding Richard immediately. They knew each other the way people know each other in small towns, through years of complicated history that had eventually settled into something like mutual respect. Hernandez read the room in under 4 seconds. Sir, he said to Darren, step outside with me. These men were threatening. Sir, the word didn't get louder. It didn't need to. It just got final. Carol's hand was shaking as she pulled the folded papers from her bag. The restraining order. Photographs on her phone. A voicemail she played for Hernandez with the volume up and watched his expression go flat and professional in the way that meant he was taking careful note of every word. Elva hadn't moved from Richard's side. She had her face pressed against his vest, one small fist still wrapped in the leather, and she wasn't letting go. Not yet. Darren Mack left the diner in handcuffs. He didn't go quietly. Men like him never did. There was a moment at the door where he turned back, eyes finding Carol one last time, mouth opening around something that Hernandez shut down with a single firm hand on his shoulder before it could become words. The door swung closed behind them. The blue and red light outside pulsed twice more, then disappeared down the highway. The diner exhaled. It was the strangest thing. The way a room full of strangers collectively released a breath none of them had realized they were holding. The teenage boys looked at each other. The woman who had set down her fork picked it up again. Linda, the waitress, put the coffee pot back on the burner and stood there for a moment with her hand on the handle, not moving, like she needed another second before she could go back to normal. Normal felt very far away. Carol sat with her face in her hands at the booth table, not crying exactly, past crying, the way people get when they've spent so long being afraid that relief doesn't come as tears. It comes as stillness. A terrifying, unfamiliar quiet where the threat used to be. Elva sat beside Richard. She hadn't moved from his side since the handcuffs clicked. Her breathing had slowed. Her small fists had finally loosened their grip on his vest, though her shoulder was still pressed firmly against his arm, like she wasn't entirely ready to trust that stillness yet. Hernandez came back inside, spoke quietly with Carol, took her statement in the corner booth while Richard sat with Elva, and for a long time neither of them said anything at all. It was Elva who broke the silence. "Are you actually somebody's daddy?" she asked. She wasn't looking at him. She was tracing a scratch on the table with one finger, the way children ask the questions that matter most, sideways, without making it a big thing. Richard was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "I am. Do you see her?" The question landed somewhere deep and unguarded. He felt it the way you feel a bruise you'd forgotten about. Sudden, specific, and more honest than you were prepared for. "Not as much as I should," he said. Elva nodded slowly, like that answer made a kind of sense to her that she wasn't going to push on. Then she looked up at him with those wide, still red eyes and said, completely matter-of-factly, "You should fix that." Richard Collazo, a man who had faced down things that would have broken most people, who had built an entire identity around never being caught off guard, had absolutely nothing to say to a 6-year-old girl in a pink raincoat. He just nodded. Across the booth, Carol looked up. Their eyes met briefly. No words, just the quiet, complicated gratitude of someone who knew that what had just happened in this diner was not a small thing. Outside, the road was open and empty. Richard wasn't thinking about leaving. He went back. That surprised him more than anything. Richard Collazo was not a man who went back. He rode forward. That was the whole philosophy, the whole architecture of the life he had built. Forward. Always forward. Don't look at what's behind you, because what's behind you is already gone, and looking back only makes you swerve. But 4 days after the diner, he found himself parked outside a modest apartment complex on Sycamore Street with a paper bag on his lap and absolutely no reasonable explanation for being there. Inside the bag, a coloring book, motorcycles, and a small stuffed bear he'd spotted in the window of a gas station on the way over and pulled a U-turn for without letting himself think about it too hard. Carol opened the door before he could second-guess the knock. She looked at him, then at the bag, then back at him. "She talked about you every day this week," she said quietly. "Comin." The apartment was small and warm and careful, the kind of space a woman creates when she is rebuilding something from very little, every object chosen with intention, every corner made as safe as she could make it. Children's drawings covered the refrigerator. A yellow blanket was folded precisely over the arm of the couch. Elva appeared from the hallway at a dead sprint and stopped 3 feet in front of him, suddenly shy in a way she hadn't been at the diner. She looked at the bag. "Is that for me?" "Depends," Richard said. "You like motorcycles?" Her face split open into a grin that did something violent to his composure. Later, while Elva was spread across the living room floor with the coloring book, Carol made coffee and they sat at the small kitchen table, and she told him things she hadn't told most people. The years of it, the slow way Darren had made her world smaller and smaller until the apartment and the careful voice and the watching of doors was just what life was. How long it had taken her to understand that fear had become her normal. "Elva picked you, you know," Carol said. She was looking at her coffee cup. "She told me afterward. She said you looked strong." She paused. "She also said you looked sad." Richard said nothing. "She said sad people understand when you're scared." Carol looked up. "She's 6 years old, and she already knows that." The words moved through him slowly, the way cold water moves, finding every crack, every hollow place, every sealed-off room he hadn't visited in years. Maya's face. Pink envelope. Return to sender. "You should fix that." He heard Elva's voice from the living room, humming something tuneless and content, completely absorbed in her coloring, and felt the specific ache of a man being shown exactly what he had been missing by someone too young to know that's what she was doing. "Yeah," he said finally. "She's something." Carol nodded. "She is." The news story ran on a Thursday. A local reporter had gotten hold of the diner footage. Someone's phone video, shaky and partially obscured, but clear enough. Clear enough to see a little girl in a pink raincoat climbing into a booth. Clear enough to see a large man in a Hell's Angel vest wrap his arm around her without hesitation. Clear enough to see what happened next. The clip ran 90 seconds. By Friday morning, it had been shared 40,000 times. Richard found out about it the way he found out about most things someone else told him. Big Mike called at 7 a.m., laughing in that low, rumbling way of his. "Brother, you're famous." Richard had hung up, made coffee, and sat with it for a while before looking it up. He watched the clip once. Didn't watch it again. What he didn't know, couldn't have known, was that 1,100 miles north in a college dormitory in Portland, Oregon, a 19-year-old girl named Maya Collazo was sitting cross-legged on her bed with her laptop open, watching the same clip on a news share her roommate had sent her as a joke. "Isn't this insane? LOL. Maya hadn't laughed. She'd watched it 3 times. Then she'd sat very still for a long time. Then she'd done something she hadn't done in years. She'd gone to the shoebox on the top shelf of her dorm closet and taken down the stack of pink envelopes she had never opened, never thrown away, never known quite what to do with. There were 16 of them. She opened the oldest one first. Richard was at the chapter house on Saturday afternoon when his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize, but an area code he knew by heart. He stared at it through 2 full rings. 3. His thumb hovered. He answered. The voice on the other end was young, careful, carrying 8 years of distance in every syllable, and something else underneath that. Something that sounded, if he didn't let himself want it too much, like the very early edge of hope. Asterisk, Dad? Asterisk. 1 word. 3 letters. Richard Collazo, who had ridden through 2 hurricanes and a riot and things he didn't have names for, felt his legs go uncertain beneath him. He sat down on the nearest chair without looking for it. Maya. Her name came out rough. Unpolished. True. I saw the video. A pause. Mom told me some things. About the custody stuff. About what actually happened. Another pause, longer. I've been reading your letters. He pressed his free hand flat against his knee to stop it from shaking. I kept them all, she said quietly. I didn't know if she stopped. Started again. I didn't know. I know, he said. I know you didn't. Outside the chapter house window, the road ran straight and open in both directions. For the first time in 8 years, Richard Collazo looked at it and didn't feel the need to choose one. For years past, not easily, not in a straight line, the kind of 4 years that have setbacks built into them. Awkward phone calls that end too soon, visits that carry the weight of everything that needs to be said and the inability to say all of it at once. Healing that moves at its own pace regardless of how much you wanted to hurry. But it moved. Maya came down for Thanksgiving that first year. Just 2 days, she'd been clear about that up front, and Richard had agreed to it the way you agree to terms you're grateful to receive. They'd eaten at a diner because neither of them cooked and talked for 4 hours about everything except the things that mattered, and then talked for 1 more hour about exactly the things that mattered. She'd hug him at the car. Brief, a little stiff but real. He'd sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes afterward with his hands on the wheel and his eyes burning. Elva turned 7, then 8, then 9. She grew into the kind of child who collected causes, the stray cat on the block, the new kid at school who ate lunch alone, the elderly neighbor whose groceries she carried without being asked. She had a quality that Richard recognized and couldn't quite name until Carol named it for him one afternoon over coffee. She sees people, Carol said simply. She always has. Richard had looked over at Elva, who was at that moment attempting to teach the stray cat to sit on command with the focused determination of someone who saw no reason why this shouldn't work. Yeah, he said. She does. He and Carol had built something careful and good between them. Not romantic, never that, but the particular friendship that forms between people who have been through something real together. She'd met someone the following year, a quiet man named Thomas who coached youth basketball and made her laugh in a way that reached her eyes. Richard had shaken his hand and meant it. The chapter had changed too. The Domestic Violence Awareness Program Big Mike had proposed in the months after the diner had grown into something none of them had entirely anticipated. Shelter escorts, fundraisers, a formal partnership with 2 women's crisis centers in the parish. It gave the weeks a different shape, a purpose that sat differently than the road did. And Maya was studying social work at Portland State. She called every Sunday now, had for the past 2 years. The calls lasted longer each time. She'd started saying I love you at the end, quietly, like she was still getting used to the weight of it in her mouth, but had decided it was worth the vulnerability. He said it back every time. Last month, she'd asked if she could bring her boyfriend to meet him at Christmas. Richard had said yes before she finished the sentence. He was sitting in that same corner booth at Patty's Diner when he got the message. Same seat, same black coffee, different man entirely. Elva slid in across from him, 10 years old and completely herself, and stole a piece of his toast without asking. You look happy, she said, chewing. Richard looked at her. At the crayon drawing she'd brought to show him, rolled up and tucked under her arm. At the door Carol was about to walk through. At his phone on the table with Maya's last message still on the screen. Yeah, he said. I am. The auditorium at Jefferson Middle School seated 300 people. Every seat was filled. Elva Ritchie stood at the podium in a white blouse and dark slacks, her hair pulled back, her hands resting flat on either side of the microphone stand the way she practiced. She was 12 years old, and she stood like someone who had learned early that the world could be frightening and had decided to stand in it anyway. Richard sat in the 4th row. To his left, Carol, her hand wrapped around Thomas's arm, eyes already bright before Elva had said a single word. To his right, Maya, 23 years old, a semester away from her social work degree, her shoulder pressed against her father's in the uncomplicated, easy way that had taken 3 years to arrive at and now felt like it had always been there. Elva's voice came through the microphone clear and steady. 5 years ago, I was the most scared I have ever been in my life. The auditorium went quiet in that particular way. That means everyone in the room has decided simultaneously to listen. I was 6 years old, and I had learned things that 6-year-olds shouldn't have to know. I knew how to read a room. I knew how to make myself invisible. I knew how to measure the distance to the nearest door. She paused. What I didn't know yet was that strangers could be safe, that help could come from somewhere you never expected it, that the most frightening-looking person in the room could turn out to be exactly the person you needed. Richard felt Maya's hand find his in the dark and hold on. A man I had never met became my protector because I asked him to. He didn't have to say yes. He didn't know me. He didn't know me anything. Elva looked up from her notes and found Richard in the 4th row with the directness she had possessed since she was 6 years old and grabbing a stranger's vest with both fists. He said yes anyway. Carol made a small sound beside Thomas. Thomas put his arm around her. He taught me that family is not always the people you are born to. Sometimes family is the person who shows up in the right place at the right moment and chooses, when they didn't have to choose, to stand between you and the thing you are afraid of. She looked back at her notes, then back up. He gave me my life back. The auditorium erupted. Richard's vision went the way it went now. Sometimes, when things were too true to look at directly. He felt Maya squeeze his hand once hard. Afterward, Elva came off the stage and walked straight to him the way she always had, directly, without hesitation, like she decided on her destination and saw no reason to take the long way. She hugged him with both arms. "I told them what you did for me," she said into his shoulder. Richard held on. "You know what you did for me?" he said quietly. She pulled back and looked up at him. "You gave me mine back too." And that is the true story of Richard Collazo and Elva Ritchie. A little girl who was brave enough to ask a stranger for the one thing she needed most. A man who said yes when he didn't have to, and in doing so, found his way back to the person he had spent 8 years trying to forgive himself for losing. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that family is chosen just as much as it is born, that strangers can be safe, that it is never too late to walk back through a door you think you closed forever, then do something simple right now. Hit that like button. It takes 1 second, and it tells me that stories like this one matter to you, that you want more of them. If you are new here, welcome. This channel exists for one reason: to find us stories that remind us what people are actually capable of when it counts. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss one. And I want to hear from you in the comments right now. Not tomorrow, right now, while this is still sitting in your chest. Tell me, is there a Richard Collazo in your life? Someone who showed up when they didn't have to? Someone who chose you when they had every reason not to? Or maybe you were someone's Richard Collazo and you don't even know it yet. Drop it below. I read every single one. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story today, someone who is struggling, someone who has written themselves off, someone who thinks the doors they've closed can never be opened again, share this with them. Right now. Don't wait. Because that is exactly what Richard would do. I'll see you in the next one.